Welcome, everybody. Today, we're going to be talking about some accessibility best practices and really diving into digital and non-digital strategies to reach all learners. Today, I am here with my colleague, Chris Garcia. He's a coordinator in Ed Tech, and he's going to be supporting in the chat. And I am Carrie Lane. I am a project specialist at the San Diego County Office of Education. Before working at SDCOE, I taught third grade and middle school English. And I have a master's degree in learning design and technology and a certification in assistive technology. On the slideshow, which is shared in the chat, we have also a link to the resources for today. So you can also contact me if you have any questions about anything that's shared today or that has been shared throughout the series. And I always like to leave this disclaimer up. I won't read too much of it, but today we're going to be diving into some tools and resources, extensions, AI. And so just for you all to know, there are so many out there. These are just options for you. And before you install or utilize tools, it's always really important to check with your district to make sure that they are vetted for privacy and reliability. And especially today, we're going to be going more general. So we're going to be talking about accessibility as a whole, not so much about specific disabilities. So if you have students with specific disabilities, it's always really good to talk to 504 and IEP specialists, as well as students' families before implementing tools and strategies. So today, what we're going to do is we're going to identify 5 learning best practices to support all learners. And we're going to dive into examples of digital and non-digital mechanisms to implement these strategies. So before we get started in the chat, if you would like to share just where you are coming from and what do you teach elementary school, middle school, high school, what population of students do you teach? Okay, some TKs, elementary, high school, okay, first grade, 4, 5, TK to 6, okay, 6th grade. Great, so we have a span, and really this presentation is meant to be strategies that you can use with earlier grades or later grades, students with general learning needs, specific learning needs. It's really just meant to give you best teaching practices and some tools to do all of those things. So let's get started by talking about UDL, voice and choice. And I really like this video, so we are going to start with a quick video about understanding UDL and making sure that we teach toward the edges of our classroom rather than teaching toward the middle. So let me pull that up for you. Oops.
This is the question I'm trying to answer in my research. Is how can we find the value in the day-to-day practice in our classrooms in terms of inclusive education? So how am I going to explain this to you? Now I can sit here and try and describe this, or we could have a little bit more fun. Why don't we go bowling? So let's talk about bowling. You have 10 pins, you have 2 balls, and you have a lane. The goal is to knock down as many pins as you can. But if you don't get them all, it's okay because you have another chance. But when I bowl and roll the ball down the middle and I don't knock them all down, what often ends up happening to me is that there's 2 pins left standing on either end and they stare at you. It's the 7-10 split and it's the hardest shot in bowling. How is bowling like teaching? The ball was the lesson, the pins are the kids. We aim for the middle, we do the best we can. The pins that are left standing, we often have another chance to kind of get to them, but at the end of the day, those 2 pins that are staring, looking at you, are kids who need the most support and are kids who need the most challenge. So we end up choosing one, and the other one is left standing. I just took all the fun out of bowling. Now, I don't know how many times you've watched professional bowling, but I spent an afternoon watching professional bowling, and let me tell you, there was not one bowler who rolled that ball down the middle of the lane. They throw the ball down the lane at a curve. And I was actually really curious about this, so I called up a professional bowler. He was so excited. I don't think he gets a lot of calls about education. He said the reason why the ball has to enter at a curve is because you will knock down more pins and create a bigger domino effect if you enter at that angle. But in order to do that, you have to change your aim. In order to knock down the most pins with one shot, he aims for the pins that are the hardest to hit. Now let's just let this sink in for a second. We are taught to teach the head pins. We are not taught to teach to the kids who are the furthest and the hardest to get to, the kids with autism, the kids with Down syndrome. The part that's critical here, and it really aligns with universal design for learning, is that so often the supports that we design for those kids on the outside of the lane are actually supports that all of the kids need. This is the part we need to understand if inclusive education is going to move forward in Canada. How can we find this value of diversity?
Okay, so I just like to show that because I think it gives you a really good understanding of the concept of universal design for learning in terms of working to remove barriers for our students that need those barriers removed, but at the same time, by doing so, creating opportunity for all of our students. And so in doing this, we can really transform inclusive education. And the principles of universal design for learning are linked here. So if you are interested in learning more, basically what universal design for learning looks to do is it offers students multiple ways that they can engage with the content, that they can express themselves through action, and multiple ways that the content is represented. And so if you go to this link, there are the guidelines as well as suggestions for ways to implement all of these practices. But really, as we're thinking about accessibility in our classrooms, it's about thinking about how we're going to design our assessments, our teaching methods, and our materials, as well as just our overarching goals for our students by thinking that all of our students can do it. So being a warm demander for our students and also giving them the availability of choice and ways that they can show their voice in different manners so that they can all learn and all of our students have that opportunity to really get the most out of their education. And so the reasons that UDL voice and choice are so important is because when students have voice and choice and opportunities to represent themselves and learn in a way that works for them, it increases motivation and interest. It also builds confidence and ownership, which is so paramount in making sure that our students are able to succeed in their learning. It promotes a sense of community, especially as we're designing classrooms. If we're thinking about these things to begin with, then we're not othering our students. Our students are having that same opportunity to do things in different ways. So it's kind of like taking all of those little silos that otherwise would be created if you're only designing for one group. And instead, if you design for variability to begin with, then variability is the norm and it creates a sense of community. It provides true differentiation, and we'll talk a lot more about that later, and it creates new pathways for learners to succeed. And so for each of these different things that we're going to talk about today, I'm going to provide you with some non-digital methods that you can use and then some digital tools, and I'll preview one or two highlights, but they're all linked here so that you can have an opportunity to see what you like and what you might use in your classroom. And so some of the options for giving your learners choice would be options for writing, options for reading. So what kind of content they're creating and experiencing. If students are able to self-select that, there's a lot more buy-in. Additionally, having learners create decision trees that help them to make their own choices. And as we said with UDL, providing multiple means for them to engage and express themselves. And so just a couple of different digital methods that you can do. I put some sites here in case you want your students to select their own reading materials. And then a new tool that is really useful for creating choice boards is an AI tool. So I want to preview that for you. And we will take a look at that. And then I put here an app and a website where you can have your students make decision trees, or this daily decision wheel allows students to put all the choices that they have to make in the app, and then it just spins a wheel for them and helps them to choose. So let's look at this Magic School, which is an AI tool. It's come out recently. Some of you may have seen it before. I know that I have previewed some of the AI tools and extensions before for some of you. So if you're using Magic School AI, one of the nice things about it is it has lots of different things to help teachers to meet the needs of their students. And one of them is a choice board creator. And so if you click into here, you can select the grade level you teach. Actually, I think I saw a lot of 6th grades. And then you can talk about what you're teaching in 6th grade. And so for many of you who've been to many of my sessions, I used to be an English teacher, so we'll say thesis statements. And then you can say what you want to include. We'll just say different modalities. And then you hit generate. And within seconds, it has created a choice board of activities that my students can do to show that they understand how to write thesis statements or how to utilize thesis statements. And of course, afterwards, I would peruse this and make sure that they all matched with what I'm actually trying to accomplish as my learning goal. But this is a really great way to take about 80% of the work out of creating choice boards, which can sometimes be really time consuming. Okay, so let's jump back into our slides. And in addition to giving our learners choice, another thing that's really useful is to give them voice. And so many of these, I'm sure you are all doing, things like think, pair, shares. Another one, equitable calling strategies, really important. Some of you might be using popsicle sticks or random calling. Giving students an opportunity to journal can be a really great way for them to share their voices, and offering opportunities for peer feedback, sharing of opinions. And so I put on here some digital ways to do that. Of course, there's Flipgrid, which is now Flip. You can use just a camera phone or iMovie app. Those are great ways students can just videotape themselves sharing their voice or participating in a lesson. Of course, you can also do something like a back channel. That could be something as simple as a shared collaborative Google Doc, but there are also back channel programs that work, such as YoTeach or Padlet, where you have Post-it notes and you can kind of keep going with student Post-it notes as you're teaching a lesson. The other one, which I didn't put on here, but is actually a really fantastic way to do a back channel, and I think I will demo this one for you, is within your Google Slides. If you're using Google Slides, you can actually click on this arrow, and when you're in presenter view, there's this option to do audience tools, and you can hit start new, and this gives your students a link to basically collaborate and ask questions as you're teaching a lesson. So and then your students can ask that question and other students can upvote it. And then in your presenter view, you can see it. You can also see it if you go into your tools and you go into Q&A history, you can now see any of your students' questions. So that was one I didn't put on there, but I think is worth mentioning. And then if you are thinking about how to digitally have equitable calling strategies, there's a program called Wheel of Names where you can just upload a CSV or a list of your class names, and then it will spin a wheel. There's also a similar thing in Classroom Screen. And what I like about Classroom Screen is it has many different tools at once. And so as you can see, it has a nice picture as its background. And I'm just going to make this a little smaller because my bar is in the way. So you can change the background. You can do a poll, which is another opportunity to give your students voice during a lesson. And then you can do a randomizer where you open a name list. So you type out your students or you upload your students in, and then it will randomly select names from the randomizer. So another great way to call out to students randomly. And then you'll notice, and we'll talk about sound level, there's a measurement of sound for your students. There are work symbols. So in my elementary school classroom, I know I used to always have like a traffic light when students were able to walk around the classroom freely, or if it was time where they were supposed to be seated at their work or ready to transition to the next thing. And so this is a great place where you just have all of these visual cues all in the same place. And then I put in here just kind of facilitating if you're doing universal design and you want students to be able to have multiple ways to represent their learning, you can do things like podcast, audio recording, sharing of sound bites, and those are some programs for that. You can have them create screencasts. And so some of the ways that you can easily do that would be Screencastify or ScreenPal. Additionally, you can do PowerPoint recording. So if you're a Microsoft school, you can use the record function within PowerPoint. You can have them create their own images. Canva is nice for this just because teachers get free Canva accounts and they can set up classrooms. So this would be a great opportunity for you to use Canva in your classroom. And then I put on here multimodal tools, so tools to create ebooks and also night storytelling tools, which is an interesting one because it has all these different projects you can do with your students, including having them make timelines or story maps, VR stories, things like that. All right, before we move into our second one, I see I had a question. Oh, great, excellent. So Eric shared that he created a mitosis quiz to use tomorrow. Yeah, some of these tools are really quick and easy and fun to use. Any other questions or things that you can think of that are useful to share for giving learners voice and choice, either digitally or non-digitally? I'll give about a minute to either unmute or share in the chat. Okay, well, if anyone decides to share, just feel free to share in the chat and then we can always unmute afterwards. So the second one is, I think, common knowledge to most of us as educators, but getting to really know and understand your learners is very important to being able to meet their needs and to making an accessible classroom. And so it's important because it allows you to tailor instruction and interventions to meet needs. And we're going to move into that a little bit later. But if you don't know your students to begin with, it's going to be really hard to use any digital tool or AI or anything else that you might do to meet their needs, because we're the educators and we're the people who really have that opportunity to have the relationship where we understand our students. So that's kind of that imperative first step. Additionally, when students feel that you know and understand them, they are significantly more motivated, and it creates a better classroom community. It builds trust with your students. And for you as an educator, or for us as educators, it helps us to understand what's driving behavior, because a lot of times what we're seeing is not always as clear as what we think it is. There might be something behind it that we're not understanding. And so it really does help to understand that background. And it allows us to help our students to build their own awareness. So if we understand our students, we can help our students to enhance their decision-making skills, their relationship building skills, their awareness. And I see in the chat, thank you, WordWall has great interactive features. Eric, I may call on you afterwards to share a little bit about that. So here are some tools and strategies to get to know your learners. And some of the non-digital methods that you might use are things like student inventories. A lot of us do that at the beginning of the year, where we just kind of help or get to know our students using types of inventories. Throughout our beginning lessons, we might do something like an entrance ticket, a KWL chart, know, want to know, learn, thumbs up or thumbs down. Again, at the beginning the year or at the beginning of a unit, we might try to find out our learners' interests or preferences. I also put on here a link to Shadow a Learner Challenge. So this is a really interesting one because a lot of design thinking, if you're familiar with it, uses the idea of empathizing with your audience. And when we really want to get to know what it's like for a student, it is very impactful to shadow a student for a day. It helps us a lot to get to know them. So while that wouldn't be something you can do when you're supposed to be teaching, it might be something that your school could kind of embark on where teachers get to trade off and shadow a student for a couple of periods, and that helps a lot too. I also put some get to know you activities. And then if you're trying to encourage your students to articulate how they're feeling, things like mood charts or using avatars and emojis might be useful as well. Thank you, Eric, for sharing in the chat. So I put on here some digital ways to do each of these things. If you're doing an interest survey or preferences, you can create a simple Microsoft or Google form. I put on here a template for mapping for empathy for your learners. So you're welcome to make a copy of this template. And this can just help you as you're getting to know your learners. It can also help you if you want to share it with your students, and then they can start to understand how to empathy map as well. I put a whole bunch of opportunities for get to know you presentations and activities. Also some pre-assessment platforms. And then there are a lot of mood tracking apps out there. There was one that I really liked, but they recently made it non-free. And so I'm sure you can find one, but generally what a mood meter would look like is a grid where students are able to articulate where they're feeling in quadrants of, am I feeling pleasant? Am I feeling energetic? And then kind of define it based on those things. And it can start as basic and it kind of moves into more nuanced as students get more used to it. And so the only other one that I want to point out here, just because my background is in journalism. And so one of the things I really like to do when getting to know students is have them create things that look like newspaper templates. And so this website has all sorts of templates for students to create like an expose about themselves or a feature article about themselves. So I like to show that one too. All right, I see in the chat, let's see. Perfect. So Eric, if you have a minute, perfect. How about if I turn it over to you and unmute you and you can share briefly for maybe 2 minutes or so about the tool that you're sharing. Perfect.
Fantastic. So my name is Eric Frey. I'm a science teacher at San Pasquale Academy. It's the only residential program for foster youth in the country. It's a very unique program. So we get kids from every different level, big, huge gaps in education. So your resources are absolutely spectacular. So let me share super quickly, even just 1 minute. Share my screen. Disabling. It says disabled. Shall I try again? You're muted. Carrie, you're muted.
Chris, can you make Eric a co-host just for a second?
Ah, wonderful. Okay. Whoops, where's my share button? Share screen. Okay, it was hidden. All right, so I'm going to share just the, I've been poking around a lot. So here it is. Can you see it? See the wheels here? Is that, yes, you can see it? Okay, so basically WordWall is free. You go in there and these are some of my activities, but there are hundreds of different types of templates and everything. You design the template, you put in the answers. So for instance, you talked about, calling kids in class. So I have, a chemistry random wheel for calling on students. So I put it up and they put their They put their names in there and then I spin it and then it lands on a random kid. And I have this in a separate window, multiple tabs. Oh, this happens to be a vocabulary, but there's ones with student names in there. Okay, sorry. All right, next one. Let's go back to my activities. This is one of my absolute favorite ones. It's whack-a-mole. Again, I edit the content. So there's me, the right answer, the wrong answer. Okay. So I'll just show you one thing. So let's go to the whack-a-mole. And you can choose all kinds. This happens to be the Wild West, you know. And so basically, what is a metal? So sodium's a metal. Sodium's a metal. These are not metals. Okay. Sodium's a metal. And so it goes on for a minute and, you know, they practice and, you know, goes by the time and what their time is and what their score is. So just a fun thing that my kids just love. And, you know, I can change it up like crazy. And it's not AI. I was so impressed with the AI just making a quiz like that. But this is something easy, fun, and you save it forever. So that's it. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think that's a great tool, and that's exactly why I like to ask people if they have anything else to share out too, because I think that sometimes we each have resources that other people might not know about. So thank you for sharing that. And just because Eric did mention AI, I did want to go in and just mention that Quizzes has an AI feature now that also is a really fun one to try out. So if you're using Quizzes AI, and it is freemium, so there are some things that you can't do, but you basically can paste in your own text or create from scratch. And then as you start to do it, you can select whether you like the questions. And if you like a certain vein of questions that you're getting, then you can hit make more like this. So you can say like, make 5 more just like this. And you can select which ones you like, and then you can even make it all related to one theme. So if you're trying to make it related to Valentine's Day, you can make them all related to that. Every question will change and be updated for that. You can make it fun. You can differentiate. So you can take out choices based on what level you want. You can adjust the Lexiles. And so Quizzes does have this new AI feature that's really nice as well. Okay. So moving into strategy number 3 for your students is encouraging them to understand how to manage their time and keep organized. And as we do this for our students, it helps them to feel confident. It makes your class a whole lot more productive. It enhances learning. And then this creates skills within students that they can use throughout their lives. And it often is very impactful on their grades. And so some of the non-digital methods that I recommend for this are things like chunking strategies. So thinking about taking your tasks and breaking them up into smaller chunks. And we'll look at a tool for that in just a little bit. That's excellent for doing this. I put on here things for priority setting. So there's things like the Eisenhower matrix, which is a similar one to that grid for mood meter, where you look at things based on a quadrant system of what's important, what can be done later, what is absolutely imperative. And so you can use an Eisenhower matrix as a tool to share with your students. You can also use the ABC method, which is a method where students start to rank, and I link that in here too. They start to rank things as must-do items, should do, or, oh, it would be nice to do these. And so it's just to get kids thinking about how they can manage their time and prioritize so that we don't always have to be the ones leading. I put on here things like using non-digital planners, to-do lists, timers. I also put on here a link to the Pomodoro technique, which is a very commonly used technique for productivity. It's the idea of taking cycles of time where you actively work and then cycles of break. So usually it's about 25 minutes of active working where you don't let yourself get distracted by emails or by your phone or anything else. And then you take either a 2 or a 5-minute break to decompress, check on something else, do whatever you want to do. And then you go back to those. It's like almost like a sprint cycle of working and non-work. And I put on here also the idea of creating vision boards. So as your students are thinking about what they want, if they create a vision board, they are more likely to actually make that happen for themselves. The idea of accountability partners, having someone that they answer to or they work with to keep themselves accountable. And then the idea of visual schedules. And so I linked here to a visual picture schedule. This is Lesson Picks. And they have a lot of different templates that you can adjust for your students who really need the visualization of what they're meant to do. And so, especially for early learners, young learners, that can be really helpful to have that visual that goes along with a written schedule. But that can be useful for so many of our students because many of us, actually all of us, it's been proven, learn better by dual systems. So using the verbal and the nonverbal system to learn is super useful. And so if we have visuals that accompany text in schedules, that can be really beneficial for all of our students. So digitally, I put in some tools. Google Keep is a good one as you're teaching students to keep themselves organized. They can kind of save articles they're reading, make notes, keep themselves to-do list, all of that within Google Keep, and it kind of integrates with Google Mail and Google Calendar. And so it's a really useful tool. I personally recommend for all my students that if they can figure out what are the most important sites for themselves, the use of bookmarking by hitting star to make sure that things that they need are right on the top of their computers. Sometimes students do well with color coding. So I'll show you in a second ways that you can color code and also rename files with pictures to help keep organized. And then I put in here some of the Google and Microsoft tools that you can use for calendar, vision boarding, to-do lists. I'll preview for you Mind Hero, which is a Pomodoro timer, but it's digital. And then I put a link to this Work Smarter, Not Harder course, and I'll put it in the chat too. This is a course that SDCOE created as part of a combination between EdTech and college and career readiness that is basically a bunch of strategies for students to help them with executive functioning. So it has some activities they can do and some understanding of different executive functioning skills and how to strengthen them, as well as some productivity tips and tricks for using computers. So let me jump in to Google Drive, and I just want to show you how you would use something like color coding. And so everyone uses this differently. Your students will probably have something that means that's meaningful to them. That might be that everything related to a specific subject is a certain color. For me, what's the most impactful is to just have the one folder that I use most frequently as a specific color so that my eye is drawn to it. And from there, I always know which one I'm trying to go for. But that's really one of those things that's a strategy for your learners to recognize. And so when you right click on a folder, you can go to organize and set a folder color. And that is how your students can go in and color code. If you're a Google school, you can do the same with Microsoft. So that's a really good way to color code. The other thing that you can do is, and I linked here to it, you can use something like an Emojipedia, or depending on your device, if you hit Windows plus the period or Command, Control, and Space, you can get little emojis and pictures on your device. And then I will show you how you can then go in and rename. So for example, if I am talking about, let's say, the spelling bee, I might look for a picture of a bee. I'm going to click into it, and then I have the ability to copy it. And then when I go back to my drive, if I had my folder, which because it's not color coded, oh, there it is. I can go here, and when I rename my folder, I can now put a little visual to help me remember what it is. And now it's a little bit differentiated too. And so sometimes having those visuals also helps to draw our eye to what we're looking for. And let's preview Mind Hero. And so just with a quick thumbs up or yes, no in the chat, is anybody using a Pomodoro method for themselves or with their students currently? No, okay. All right. So if you decide to use the Pomodoro method for yourself or recommend it for your students, one of the really nice extensions that works for it is called Mind Hero. And so if you click into Mind Hero, it will pop up with a window for Mind Hero, but I like to go through the site first. And so you can set up your background and then you set hero mode. So hero mode is going to be your focused work mode. You can adjust the timers. So depending, for me, I don't like to be interrupted 25 minutes into my work. I could work for hours in focus without needing this. So I might set mine to be a lot longer, but other people might need to start really small. So you set your hero mode and you might set a reminder to start your hero mode. Then what's really nice about this is it has the ability to type in distracting sites and it will block any of those sites from your use for as long as you're in hero mode. You can also, if you want to really start to encourage your students to know their habits, they can categorize the different sites that they use as distracting, productive, or neutral. And then they can track their history of how they're doing each day with what percentage of time they're using useful things versus using something that's distractive and not useful. So you can see all of that on your main bar. You get a daily report of yourself. It sets the hero mode for you. You can create to-do lists within this area right here. And every time you complete a hero mode, you are brought to an option for a 2 or a 5-minute breathing break where you can set time for yourself. And also you can set things like different raindrops or bird sounds or things like that. And so it's kind of just a comprehensive way to make yourself focus for a certain period of time. Okay, before I move on to strategy 4, does anyone have any questions or any tools that they've used for helping students or themselves to manage time and keep organized? And just because you share it doesn't mean I'll make you unmute, only if you want to. Oh, sure. So if I wanted to do a bee, I went to that Emojipedia website, and again, and it's in the PowerPoint too, you can do it by hitting the Windows key plus a period key on your PCs and Command Control, and I think it's Shift, but space on your Mac, and that'll pop up emojis right from there. But then you basically can look through, so you can either search or you can look through the emojis to see if there's anything that relates to your content. And you can really do this with anything that you can copy. I just like this because they're small. But once you find something that you're looking for, let's do a bear for right now. So we're going to search. And I know I searched bear, but all right, just to save time, we'll do dog bone. Oh, there it is. Took some time. So once you click into this, it'll give you the option to copy it. So you just hit copy and then you go back into your drive. And this is basically just going to be renaming a folder. So when you right click on a folder, you have the option to rename it. And then you can put it anywhere within here by pasting it Control or Command V. And so basically you're just copying from one place, whatever picture or emoji you find, and then renaming a folder, and then you are pasting. And Teresa, absolutely. Using a timer is another really good way to do it. And there are probably 16 to 20 other Pomodoro timer extensions on the computer and tons of YouTube videos that count down timers too. So absolutely, it does not have to be as fancy as the Mind Hero one. We were just at a thing on Saturday for esports, and we used my mom's timer to time students in the amount of time they were playing, and that worked just as well. So absolutely, regular timers work great. Okay, so let's talk about some strategies for checking for understanding and providing feedback. So I put this as the fourth one because once we know and understand our learners and we've taught them how to take ownership of their organization and their time management, the next step for us is to really make sure that they're understanding what we're teaching and to give them feedback to help them grow. And so this is really important because it allows us to improve our instruction based on how our learners are doing throughout teaching and learning. So it's an iterative process. It also helps learners to understand how they're doing and how they're progressing with the learning goals. So it's good for us to kind of iterate on our teaching, and it's good for our learners so that they can understand where their strengths lie, where they might need some improvement or some extra strategies. And so for feedbacks and checks for understanding, I put non-digitally. There are lots of different opportunities for feedback. That could be commenting on something, that could be conferencing together, that could be self-reflection, things like glows and grows. Also, things like checks for understanding. So that could be a coin flip. If your coin is on heads, that shows me that you understand. If it's on tails, we need to talk more about it. Thumbs up and down, sticky notes, whiteboards. I link to Plickers, which is kind of like the most bare bones version of a digital way to check for understanding because you only need one device and then you print out cards and students move the cards to show which answer choice they want. And based on that, you can scan that with just one device. And then, of course, exit slips, things like that. So some digital ways to do that, you can use things like Google Docs or Microsoft Word to make comments. Students can do that for other students. You can do that for students. One thing that I really love, especially when I was teaching writing, was the idea of modeling and giving feedback via screencasting. So as I would read students' writing or as I was doing my own modeling for writing, I would talk through the process so that students could hear my voice and understand and really get to hear my feedback as I went line by line through their papers. And so, of course, most of it is going to be, positive and constructive, but there might also be some things about where they can grow and what needs a little bit of help. I put on here, you can always use, there's this program called Certify 'em that adds certificates when students complete Google Forms. And then back to our AI, there are lots of AI tools. I will take us back to that magic school to show you how you can use it for feedback and rubrics. And then there's another tool called Brisk Teaching that I'll demonstrate for you. So if we are in our AI magic school, some of the magic tools include a rubric generator. So if you are using rubrics to help your students understand what the criteria is for an assignment, you can actually have AI generate those rubrics for you. And there is another section in here somewhere. I'm just going to Command F for feedback. Student work feedback. So based on criteria you set up, AI will give you comments that then you can put in as feedback. And of course, you would tailor that to your own students and kind of adjust it, but at least it gives you a baseline. And then the other one, Brisk Teaching, does something kind of similar. So that's an extension. It's right here. You can see this little logo that says Brisk Teaching. It pops up once you've added it into the bottom corner of any of the documents that you have. So Word docs, Google Docs. And so with this, you can replay if you're in Google Docs and basically show all the changes that have happened in a video format. You can also give feedback. So this gives you an opportunity to give glows and grows feedback, to make it based on a rubric criteria, or to give them next steps. And I actually think I'm going to go into a document really quickly just so that you can see it within a document too. Let's see if I can start a new one. So within here, you can now see this replay video of all the things that have changed. You can click on create and it gives you AI tools that you can create. It gives you options for feedback. So some of the same, and then you can also target Google comments and rubrics and standards. And the other one that you can do is you can change Lexile levels. So if you have a whole document full of things, you can then go in and adjust the reading level to a different grade and a different language. So all pretty useful and quick and easy to adjust. Some other things that I linked on here, if you are checking for understanding, there are digital KWL chart templates out there. I added one from Read, Write, Think that basically will allow you to type in a topic and then create a digital KWL chart that your students can write into or you can print. And I put in here the option of meme creation. So many of us are using memes nowadays. And I know sometimes we do this in our trainings as an icebreaker, but it can be a fun thing for students to show what they know too. If you give them the correct parameters, you can have them create a meme that showcases what they learned in class that day. All right. Any questions or other ones that any of you are using? Okay, that takes us to the fifth and final strategy for today, which is to offer supports and differentiation. And for those of you who have been to previous sessions, we have done a lot of kind of tools, AI, extensions, device features for differentiation. So this one, some of them may have been previewed before, but I do think that this is one of the most important strategies for making sure your classroom is accessible. So offering supports and differentiation is when you tailor instruction to meet learners' needs. You may be designing specific interventions to do this, or you may be taking more of that UDL approach where you think backwards as you're planning to all of the different ways that students can express what they know ahead of time, so that then you don't have to go in and design so many interventions at each point in the process. So the more we get our heads around thinking through it before we start, the less we'll have to do accommodations and interventions specifically. Of course, we still will be doing that because some of our learners do need that, but it kind of takes away the emphasis on that, and it puts more of that spin when we're designing. And that helps to increase learner motivation, create classroom communities, and build trust for our students. And so I put for non-digital methods, there is a website called the Can Do It Experience. This is really more of a tool for younger students, but it gives them that feeling of looking at what they're good at. So it's just a website that gives them that, yes, I am good at this. I can do it. The idea of utilizing simulations and manipulatives. So there are tons of simulations and manipulatives that can be done without a computer. Offering options for movement and brain breaks. I had one class out of my 30 students, I think I had 24 boys, and they were all very, very active, third grade, very active boys. And that class was honestly, they just needed breaks. And so we would do, I put on here a link to an extension called Move It. But what that would do is every 20 minutes or so, and I don't remember the exact time that I said it, it would pop up with a movement prompt, and my kids would be doing little push-ups for 2 minutes, and then we get back to learning. But they needed that so that they could then focus back on learning. And some classes and some students just need movement and brain breaks. I also linked here to a cognitive learning strategies course. This is another one that the ed tech team at SDCOE combined with our college and career readiness group to create. And this one focuses on ways that students can learn how to basically study and learn. So strategies for spacing out learning, things about chunking information, ways to use mnemonics and sketchnoting, and all sorts of tricks that will help them learn. So here is a link to that. And that's a free course, so you're welcome to look through it or use it with your students. And for some digital methods, we won't look at all of these, but some of the ones I put on here were tools to create simulations like PhET. Many of you are probably familiar with that one. I like Toy Theater. It's a good one for creating math manipulatives, especially like fraction strips, where you can then have students understand equivalent fractions, because I remember when teaching third grade, that was an incredibly difficult concept for students. And I feel like this is a really nice way to help them see it in action. I also put on here, so there are two more that are specifically for math, and then one for text-based graphic organizers. So this one, if you click into here, you can find text-based graphic organizers that your students can use that are basically checklists to help them as they're writing different types of writing. And it will, once they formulate it, so they get to add transitions and they add in whatever they're doing, it matches with what they're writing, and then they have a full page that they can work from that's like an outline for them at the end. I also put in here some AI tools, because AI tools make things like translating and adapting content a little bit easier. Once we have done that, of course, we go back and make sure that everything is reliable and accurate and meets the needs of our learners. And just because I haven't said it yet, it's also really important, especially when we're thinking about our students, that we don't put any specific information about our students in there. So even if we're trying to gather something that makes it more relevant for students or more accessible to students, we should still not put in any student information into this, because we still don't really know exactly where all the AI information we're inputting is going to end up. So here are some tools for adapting and translating. And I also put in here a link to 11 Labs, which my colleague Chris uses quite often. So he said if anyone has any questions about it, you can put it in the chat for him. What 11 Labs does is it takes videos that you have recorded of yourself, and it uses AI to basically translate that into other languages. So Chris has a really good video where he's teaching a math lesson in English, and then it takes that lesson and it looks like he's speaking and it sounds just like him with the same mannerisms, but now it's in Spanish. And so he uses it pretty frequently, and he is definitely the person to ask questions for if you have any questions about that. I also put on here a tool called Goblin Tools, which is another one that I think is really interesting because it breaks things up into tasks. And so for your students who are having a hard time with completing activities that have too many steps, now they can have things broken into chunks. So for example, if we want students to solve an algebraic equation, I think I spelled that wrong, I would hit it here, and then I hit this little AI tool. And it's going to tell me all of the different steps involved in doing this. And as you go down to each step, you can break that item down even further. And now to identify a variable, you need to understand the equation. You need to identify the values. And so it just takes those things that might otherwise seem overwhelming and breaks them down for students to help them. The other really useful feature within here is the compiler. So some of our students may have lots going on in their head. Maybe they're just the type who need to blurt out everything. This allows them to brain dump into this text box, and you can speak into it so they don't even have to type it in, and then it will turn it into tasks for them to complete later. I also put on here the link to Move It, which was that extension that I used with my students to give them movement breaks. We talked about Classroom Screen because that has some visual cues for movement. And then this Bouncy Balls is another great way to kind of monitor your class noise level visually. So some students get overwhelmed when it's too loud. Some students are louder by nature. So what you can do if you hit start bouncing, in my class, I used to have this up sometimes. And basically once the microphone is connected, I'm gonna try to make this work right now. Let's see. And I clap or it gets loud, you'll see the balls bouncing too. And it'll give them prompts without me constantly having to yell at my students or say, you're too loud. So that one's a fun one as well. And the last one that I always like to show for differentiation and supporting students is the immersive reader. The immersive reader is a Microsoft app, but there is now an extension for it as well. And so when you are on any web page, if you have the extension, and I'm just gonna reload, if you highlight text and right click, you'll see this help me read this. And it will pop up in a different view, hopefully. Let's see. If it doesn't, that's okay. I will just show you really quickly on the Microsoft version. So here's Microsoft, and the immersive reader allows us to see it in a different view. We can listen to it.
Here is my page text.
You can adjust the voice and the speed. There are reading preferences that can turn on line focus, so it can be a reading ruler for your students who benefit from a reading ruler. You can do a picture dictionary that when you click on a picture, it will read it aloud to you and show you a visual of the word. It translates full documents or by word. It has a reading coach, so your students can actually read into it and it'll give them feedback on how they're reading and what they need to practice with. For English teachers, you can label syllables and parts of speech, and you can adjust things like the text size, the text spacing. The fonts here, Comic Sans is known to be useful for dyslexia, and Calibri and Sitka are both good for visual impairments. And then there are contrast options as well. And I put in there also the reading mode. There's a reading mode in Chrome that allows your students to get some of those same types of nice immersive reader features without being in the immersive reader. So they can make the text bigger or smaller, change the contrast and the spacing. And so that's a useful tool for your students as well. And that takes us to time. So we have 2 more sessions in our accessibility network. The future is going to be quite different from this one. It's going to take you through a design thinking process to start to design an accessible kind of tool or lesson for your students. And then we have Ready to Go, which is a collaboration between our equity series and our accessibility series. So we're going to meet together to talk about accessibility and inclusive technologies. And I will leave it now as, does anyone have any questions or anything they want to share? And I will add the link to Bouncy Balls.
I'm sorry, what did you say Comic Sans was good for?
Comic Sans is actually for dyslexia. So I know like teachers have gotten really over the use of Comic Sans over the time because it used to be so fun to use and people don't like using it. But research has been shown that it actually helps to support dyslexia. So
Interesting.
And then Sitka is a Microsoft created font that was meant for visual impairments, and Calibri is just a sans serif font, which anything that's missing those kind of curly cues is easier for people to read in general. So let me get the link to Bouncy Balls. And any other questions? All right, well, thank you all for joining today, and we look forward to seeing you during the future, which is our next session. I'm going to stop recording now.